Hi everyone, my name is Maria Vieira and I am a third year PhD student in music education with emphasis in piano pedagogy here at Louisiana State University. I would like to thank everyone that came in today to watch me and ask any questions. I really appreciate. And today I am going to talk about my dissertation project and more specifically about my pilot study that I ran last semester and how it helped me shape and change and guide my project for this semester. And my dissertation is called Using Performance Cues as a Memorization Strategy with Group Piano Students by Implementing Teacher and Student-Directed Learning Approaches. So let me just start by giving you some definitions first, and then we go from there. There's an extensive amount of research comparing both styles of learning in all areas of research. For teacher-directed, students usually rely on the teacher's knowledge to provide the information. For some students, this approach can be effective when the teacher is guiding the learning at the beginning until they start to feel a little bit more comfortable and start taking a lead at their own learning at their own pace. Researchers such as Bell and Bell have researched about the use of teacher-directed in nurse students. So you can see there is a really wide range of studies in here. And a good example, a musical example, can be seen at Andrew's study from 2013, where he talked about how conductors usually rely on teacher-directed because they can make most decisions regarding the pieces. In teacher-directed, the teacher is helping the students to understand and learn in the way that would be helpful for them at that time. That does not mean that they are going to always give the answer, but at that time, that's what's necessary. For student-directed, the goal is to become independent and see the teacher as a facilitator. What do I mean by facilitator? Give them time to search for answers and may even use the classroom to engage in discussions and interact among peers. When facilitating, the student will learn independently and the teacher will facilitate them to the correct way. That does not mean that the student is alone, but rather is understanding and learning in their own way. A good example can be seen in Kunkal's study from 2002, where he used student-directed approach in his management class and how it affects the students with assignments throughout the semester. Another good music example can be seen in Bazan's study from 2011, where he talks about the use of student-directed approach in middle school band teachers. I will provide all the references at the end of the presentation, and I wanted to be clear that I'm not favoring any approach, but I just want to make sure that we are aware of both of them, and there are students that are going to be needing more of teacher-directed or more of student-directed, so it's really based on the students' needs. Now into performance cues. Performance cues are mental markings that musicians will keep track of the process of the piece during the learning and during the performance. It's going to be a mental map that will guide the performance throughout the piece. The most important thing to understand is that the musician needs to be aware of the structure of the piece and how it makes sense and how it should sound to them. The steps taken for the performance cues can be introduced as the student learn a new piece. And as they practice, the instructor can encourage them to make markings and to make notes on their score. So they slowly start to introduce the cues and slowly start to memorizing the piece. So instead of starting the memorization process once the piece is learned, we are introducing the cues at the beginning, and once the piece is over, we are already memorized. Now, performance cues in piano music. I'm sure the most of you, if not all of you, have struggled with memorization at some point. In my case, I have always struggled, and I always find a very hard time memorizing pieces. So what I would do, I would play through and I would practice a bunch until I had memorized. So I kind of had muscle memory. And we all know that's not the ideal way of memorizing pieces. So during my PhD, I decided to start taking lessons again. And during one of the semesters, I talked to my professor and we started looking at different memorization strategies. And that's when I landed into performance cues. There are several studies in different instruments that have used performance cues as a strategy to work on a safer memorization. But why is this one safer? I like to say that we are going to look at the piece from a different perspective, or that we are going to take a step back from the piece and look at the big picture. Chafin has written several articles regarding the use of performance cues with professional musicians and students, and he found that so far, this use of strategy has been very helpful. And since we're talking about students here, I would like to show about one specific research done by Chafin, Lisboa, and Demos, where they observed a student throughout a semester while they learned about the use of performance cues. And during the data collection, the student made markings on their score based on different features that they found was helpful. The features are basic, expression, and interpretative. And I'll talk about the features because I decided to include them in my study as well. And you see markings such as for basic, for notes, for interpretation, we added dynamics, and for the expression, we wanted to determine the feelings that the music could bring. So in this slide, you're going to see the basic features in the piece that I've worked with my students. Those are the three pieces that I picked for them from last semester. And I highlighted in red the fingering, the hand placement, hand crossing, repetitions, and chord progressions. So just let's take a look at each, and then I'll explain a little bit. So for the tarantella, the one on your far right, you see that I highlighted hand crossing. I highlighted the repetition of the notes. I highlighted the repetition of a phrase as well. For the minuet, the one right in the middle, I highlighted how the movement of the two note slur makes sense. I highlighted the big jumps, so it's by a seventh, if it is by a sixth. And for the Bach prelude, I highlighted the chords that the broken chord show. So instead of looking at note by note, we're looking at the entire chord. For the interpretation features, you see that I highlighted that in green. I did dynamic contrast. I associated the dynamics with the movement of the piece. So for the tarantella, I marked the pedal markings. I highlighted how the notes are going higher, so we should add some dynamics. For the minuet, I added some dynamic markings that weren't there. So you see towards the end of a phrase, our notes are going down. So I added a decrescendo. For the Bach, I did the same thing. We're going up and we're going higher into a climax or something like that. So I added a crescendo or I added a decrescendo. The next one is the expression features that are highlighted in yellow. And for this one, I highlighted articulations and phrasings. So for the tarantella, I sang the left-hand melody, where you just go down and then you go up. I made sure to note to them the rest in the right hand and how that changes when you really have a rest. For the back, which is in the middle, I highlighted how the resolution can shape. So how we can see the difference between the dissonance to the resolution. And for the minuets, I highlighted the articulations and how they go up. So we should make more sound, or we should kind of sing. So I really wanted my students to sing and understand a little bit more. And it's very important to notice that all three pieces, they had the same colors for the markings. So they associated red to basic, yellow for the expression, in green for the interpretation. So based in all the readings and all the other studies regarding the learning approaches and the use of performance cues as a memorization strategy, I decided to compare the effects of student and teacher directed by using performance cues with my group piano students. And with everything that I just said, I got to the purpose of my study and some research questions that guided me throughout this study. So the purpose of this study is to compare the effect of teacher-directed and student-directed learning approaches by using performance cues as a memorization strategy with group piano level 3. And some of the research questions are undergraduate music students aware of memorization strategies? Can performance cues help students to memorize pieces in group piano courses? And is there a difference between the learning approaches among undergraduate students? For my data collection, I used 3 different pieces, the one that you just saw. And the pieces also match their level into the course. And each student had 5 days to work on the piece. So I gave the piece on day 2 of the class. So on a Thursday, they had until Tuesday to practice and then record by memory. And the way that we set up the difference between student-directed and student-directed is all students got the piece, had up to 18 minutes of practice. And then after that, for the student-directed students, we would talk and share what we feel would be good to add as a marking and what they feel they could improve. So the students would talk to me and say that they think that measure, we could write down the chord progression or the fingering. So we write it down together and I would make my copy, they would make their copy, and we would share as a conversation. For the teacher-directed group, we would talk about performance cues as well, but instead of letting them write their own markings, I gave them the markings that I found that would be nice for them to memorize. After they memorize, I sent all the recordings for 2 judges that had experience with group piano, and they rated them out of a 7 points. And each piece was graded 3 times for note accuracy, rhythm accuracy, and phrasing. The goal was to have an inter-rated reliability of 0.8, and they all had 3 pre-tests and 2 post-tests. So after the study was over and I was able to run the numbers, I found that all groups improved from the pre-test to the post-test. There was no significant difference between the student-directed and teacher-directed. And that shows me that both approaches are just as valid. So both groups showed an improvement from the treatment, which is encouraging. And I want to share now the descriptive so you can take a look at it. You're going to see there's a slight difference between pretest A to post-test F for both groups. And to conclude this presentation, I want to share what I learned from the pilot study and what I want to do differently. I am exploring new repertoire with the students, of course. I'm having a stricter training for the raters. I got different judges this time with about the same level of experience in group piano classes. I'm also sharing a rubric of grading among them for more consistency. And I'm using a larger number of students in the study. So I opened the study for group piano 4 students with pieces of their level and group piano 2 students with pieces at their level. And this was my pilot study. It was a great way of learning how to fully run a study, how to understand, how to read, and how to help me do differently the other time that I did a study, which is the semester. And I can't wait to see how the semester study turns out. And I want to thank everyone for coming. Thank you so much. This is my reference list that I used for this presentation now. Thank you so much.